What if the reason you got hurt so many times before was never that you were weak, but that you hadn't yet learned to see it coming? Think about it. The friend who only calls when they need something. The partner who somehow makes you apologize for their mistakes. The coworker who takes credit, quietly, every single time, and smiles while doing it. For a long time, you didn't notice the pattern. You just felt tired, confused, guilty for reasons you couldn't fully explain, even to yourself. Maybe you replayed conversations at night, wondering how you ended up agreeing to something you never wanted. Maybe you apologize first, even when you weren't wrong, just to make the tension go away. That wasn't stupidity. That was a mind running on its default setting. Trust first, question later. Because for most of human history, trusting the people around you was what kept you alive. Manipulation exists because it exploits that default setting. But defaults can be rewritten. And somewhere along the way, without a single dramatic moment to mark it, your mind may have already started rewriting yours. The trust doesn't disappear completely. It becomes selective, conditional, almost impossible to hijack, because it's no longer handed out for free. You might not remember the exact moment it happened. There usually isn't one. It's more like a slow accumulation. One failed guilt trip here, one ignored compliment with strings attached there, until one day, the old triggers just stop working on you. And here's the strange part. Most people who've made this shift don't even recognize it as strength. They just think something in them got quieter, less reactive, harder to shake. So here are 5 signs your mind has already made that shift, quietly, maybe without you fully realizing it yet. Not overnight, but permanently. The first one is this: you stop needing to explain yourself. Think about how it used to feel. Someone would question a decision you made, and before you even realized it, you were already justifying it, laying out your reasons, your context, your intentions, almost like you were on trial. Even small things: why you left early, why you said no to a favor, why you didn't answer a text within an hour. It felt like you owed the world a full report on your own choices, just to be allowed to make them. That instinct to explain isn't random. It comes from somewhere real, from a nervous system that learned, at some point, that being misunderstood was dangerous. Maybe not physically dangerous, but socially dangerous. Rejection has always registered in the human brain as a threat, almost the same way physical pain does. So explaining yourself becomes a kind of insurance policy. If you explain enough, surely no one can be upset with you. Surely you're safe. But manipulation depends on exactly that instinct. It needs you to feel like you constantly owe an explanation, because someone who's always explaining is someone who's always negotiating for approval. And you can't be talked out of a decision you never feel obligated to defend in the first place. So notice the next time someone questions something you did, and you feel that old pull to over-explain. Pause before you speak. Ask yourself, am I explaining this because it actually helps the conversation, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? Sometimes the most powerful sentence you can say is simply, "That's just what I decided." No paragraph attached. And once your explanations start getting shorter, something else starts happening too. You begin noticing the exact moment someone tries to make you feel guilty for something that was never actually your fault. Habit 2. Guilt tripping just doesn't land the way it used to. You know the line, "After everything I've done for you," or the sigh that says more than the words do. Or the sudden silence that's supposed to make you scramble to fix whatever you supposedly did wrong. There was a version of you that would have felt the guilt instantly, almost like a reflex. Heart tightening, mind racing to figure out what you did and how to undo it. Here's what's actually happening in a moment like that. Real guilt and manufactured guilt feel almost identical in the body at first. Same tight chest, same urge to apologize. The difference only shows up when you slow down enough to ask one question. Did I actually do something that harmed this person? Or am I being made to feel responsible for their disappointment, their expectations, or their mood? Real guilt has a cause you can point to. Manufactured guilt just has a feeling, with no clear reason attached to it. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the difference between guilt and shame that's been outsourced to you. Someone else's discomfort repackaged as your failure. And once your mind learns to ask that one question before reacting, the whole tactic starts to lose its grip. The guilt trip still gets said out loud, it just stops landing. This doesn't mean you become someone who never apologizes. It means your apologies start meaning something again, because they're reserved for moments that actually deserve one. The next time you feel that familiar tightness after someone's comment or silence, pause and ask, what exactly did I do here? If you can't answer that clearly, the guilt probably isn't yours to carry. And that same pause, that half second of noticing instead of reacting, is exactly what starts showing up somewhere else too. The third sign is this. You start noticing the pattern before the other person even finishes talking. It's a strange feeling the first time it happens. Someone starts a sentence, maybe with a compliment that feels slightly too specific, or a story about how hard their life has been lately. And before they get to the actual ask, some part of you already knows where this is going. Not because you're suspicious of everyone, because you've seen this particular shape before, in some other conversation with some other person, and your brain filed it away without you ever deciding to. This is what psychologists call pattern recognition maturing into instinct. In the beginning, spotting manipulation takes effort. You have to consciously notice the compliment felt off, or that the timing of the favor was suspicious. But the brain doesn't like doing effortful things twice. Every time you consciously catch a manipulation attempt, your mind quietly builds a shortcut, so that next time, you don't have to think it through. You just feel it. The same way an experienced driver doesn't consciously calculate when to brake. They just do it, because the pattern is already wired in. This is one of the clearest signs your mind has changed, because it doesn't feel like effort anymore. It feels like knowing, like you're 2 steps ahead of a conversation without trying to be. If you want to strengthen this instinct rather than second-guess it, start trusting that early flicker of recognition instead of talking yourself out of it. When something feels like it's building toward an ask, let yourself notice that, out loud, even, just in your own head. This is going somewhere. You don't have to react yet. Just naming it is often enough to break the spell before it fully forms. And if you're still watching this, that probably means something in you already recognizes these patterns as real. Not as abstract psychology, but as things that have actually happened to you. Most people scroll past a video like this within the first minute. You didn't. Which usually means part of you is looking for confirmation that the changes you've noticed in yourself aren't imaginary. So if this is landing, consider subscribing, not for entertainment, but because minds like this one, the kind that resist manipulation instead of absorbing it, don't build themselves overnight. They build through repetition, through noticing this stuff again and again until it becomes automatic. One reminder like this every week might be exactly what keeps that instinct sharp instead of letting it fade. Number 4. Flattery makes you more alert, not more comfortable. There used to be a version of you that softened the moment someone said something nice. A compliment felt like proof that this person saw you clearly, understood you, was on your side. And manipulation knows this about people. It's one of the oldest tricks there is, because flattery works on almost everyone, at least for a while. It lowers your guard exactly when you should be paying the most attention. But something different happens once your brain starts distinguishing between genuine warmth and strategic flattery. Genuine warmth tends to show up consistently, whether or not anyone's asking for anything. Strategic flattery tends to show up right before a request, or right after you've said no to something, almost like a soft reset button being pressed. Once your mind starts tracking timing instead of just words, the compliment stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like a signal. A small flashing light that says, "Pay attention here." This isn't cynicism. You're not rejecting kindness. You're simply no longer taking a compliment at face value just because it sounds nice. You're asking, quietly, in the background, is this coming from genuine appreciation? Or is this arriving suspiciously close to something this person wants from me? The next time praise comes your way, notice the timing before you notice the words. Did it happen out of nowhere, or right before an ask? That single habit, checking timing instead of just tone, is often the difference between being charmed and being used. And people who've built that habit tend to feel something else too, something almost unfamiliar to their old selves: comfort in silence, instead of the need to fill it. The fifth sign is this: you can sit in silence without rushing to fix it. Silence used to be unbearable in certain moments. Someone goes quiet after you say no, or stops responding after a disagreement, and the discomfort builds so fast that you find yourself reaching out first, apologizing first, softening your position first, just to make the tension disappear. The silence itself becomes the punishment, and you become the one racing to end it. The silent treatment only works as a tool on a mind that experiences disconnection as an emergency. And for a long time, most of us do. Humans are wired to treat social distance as a threat, because for most of our history, being cut off from the group actually was dangerous. So when someone goes cold, an old alarm goes off. And the fastest way to shut off that alarm feels like giving in. But that alarm can be recalibrated. As your sense of security stops depending entirely on someone else's mood in a given moment, silence starts to feel like just silence. Uncomfortable sometimes, sure, but not catastrophic. You start being able to let a pause exist without racing to fill it with an apology you don't actually owe. You can practice this in small ways. The next time someone goes quiet after you've held a boundary, resist the urge to check in first. Let the silence sit for a while. Notice that the world doesn't end. What you're building, one uncomfortable pause at a time, is the ability to tolerate disconnection without abandoning yourself to avoid it. And that ability quietly removes one of manipulation's oldest and most reliable tools. Sign number 6. You start separating what someone says from what they consistently do. For a long time, words can carry more weight than they should. Someone says, "I'll change," and you believe it, fully, even though nothing in their behavior has actually shifted yet. Someone says, "You mean everything to me," right after doing something that suggests the opposite, and the words somehow soften the sting of the action. Language has a strange power to override evidence, at least for a while. But minds shift once they start treating behavior as the real data and words as, at best, a hypothesis waiting to be tested. This isn't about becoming distrustful of everyone who speaks kindly. It's about noticing when words and actions stop matching over time, and letting that mismatch actually count for something instead of explaining it away. A single broken promise might be circumstance. A repeated pattern of promises followed by nothing is information, and manipulation depends on you ignoring that information in favor of how convincing the words sounded. This shift often shows up as a quiet internal rule. Give people 3 chances to prove a pattern. Not because you're keeping score out of spite, but because you're finally allowing repetition to mean something. If someone says one thing and does another, once, that might be a bad day. If it happens 3 times, that's simply who they are in this particular way, regardless of how well they can explain it. The next time someone's words don't quite match their track record, notice which one you're inclined to believe. If it's always the words, that's worth sitting with, because the people around you will always tell you who they are, sometimes through what they say, but more reliably through what they consistently do when it costs them something. The 7th sign: your no doesn't need a justification anymore. There used to be an entire ritual attached to saying no. You'd have to build a case first. "I'm really busy this week. I have a lot going on. I wish I could, but..." Sometimes the excuse mattered more than the actual answer. Because a plain, unsupported no felt almost rude, like you owed people a defense for protecting your own time or energy. That instinct comes from treating your boundaries as requests that need approval, rather than facts about your own life that simply exist. And manipulation thrives in that gap, because a boundary that needs justifying is a boundary that can be argued with. If your reason isn't good enough, in someone else's opinion, then your no becomes negotiable. But once a boundary is treated as a fact instead of a proposal, there's nothing left to argue with. No isn't a debate, it's a description of reality. This shift usually shows up first in small moments. Someone asks why you can't make it to something, and instead of the usual paragraph of reasons, what comes out is simply, "I can't make it." No addendum, no apology tucked into the sentence. And the strange thing is, most people accept that shorter answer just as easily, sometimes more easily, because confidence tends to be more convincing than any explanation could be. If you want to practice this, try answering one small request this week with just the no, and nothing after it. Notice the urge to add, "because," and see what happens if you let the sentence end without it. Boundaries that don't require permission are boundaries that manipulation has no real way to get around. Sign 8. You feel calm, not flattered, when someone tries too hard to win you over. There's a specific kind of effort that used to feel flattering. Someone showering you with attention, agreeing with everything you say, mirroring your interests almost perfectly, moving fast to make you feel like this connection is rare and special. It's easy to mistake intensity for authenticity, especially early on, because intensity feels like proof that someone cares. But there's a difference between genuine interest and a performance designed to bypass your usual caution. Genuine interest tends to build slowly and stays consistent whether or not you're impressed by it. A performance, on the other hand, often escalates quickly and specifically targets whatever seems to work. More compliments if compliments land. More shared interests if that's what draws you in. More urgency if hesitation shows up. Once your mind starts noticing the difference between organic warmth and calculated intensity, something shifts in how that intensity actually feels to you. Instead of flattering you, it starts to feel slightly performative, slightly too smooth. This doesn't mean you assume the worst about every enthusiastic person you meet. It means you stop mistaking speed and intensity for depth. Real connection generally doesn't need to rush, because it isn't afraid of you taking your time to notice it. The next time someone seems to be trying unusually hard, unusually fast, pay attention to your own reaction. If your first instinct is quiet observation instead of excitement, that's not you being guarded for no reason. That's a mind that has learned, somewhere along the way, that the people worth trusting rarely need to perform that hard to prove it. And the ninth sign, maybe the clearest one of all, manipulation attempts start feeling boring instead of threatening. There was a time when a manipulation tactic, the guilt trip, the sudden coldness, the too perfect compliment, could genuinely destabilize you. Your whole day could shift around one uncomfortable interaction. You'd replay it, question yourself, feel unsettled for hours. The tactic had power because it was unfamiliar, or at least because it still worked. But once your mind has seen a pattern enough times, something almost anticlimactic happens. The same tactic that used to cause hours of anxiety now just registers, briefly, as recognizable. Oh, this again. It's the exact feeling of watching a magic trick after you already know how it's done. The mystery is gone, and without the mystery, there's no real power left in the performance. Psychologists sometimes point to this as one of the clearest markers that a defense mechanism has become fully automatic. It stops requiring effort and starts requiring almost nothing at all. This doesn't mean these situations become pleasant. They just stop being disorienting. Someone can still attempt the old tactics, and you might notice a flicker of irritation, maybe even fatigue at having to deal with it again. But not the spiral, not the hours of self-doubt that used to follow. The nervous system has essentially filed the situation under handled rather than under threat. If you started feeling more boredom than fear in these moments, that boredom is not indifference. It's evidence. It means the version of you that could be shaken by this particular tactic simply isn't available to be shaken anymore. And that's not something that happened by accident. None of this happens overnight, and it rarely happens the way people imagine. No single dramatic moment where you suddenly become unshakable. Real change like this is quiet. You don't wake up one day immune to manipulation. You just notice, gradually, that a guilt trip didn't land the way it used to, that silence didn't panic you the way it once did, that you said no without needing to build a case for it first. And somewhere in the middle of all those small moments, you realize the version of you that used to be so easy to move has quietly become someone else. This isn't about becoming cold or suspicious of everyone around you. If anything, it's the opposite. The less energy your mind spends bracing against manipulation, the more of it is left over for the relationships that were never trying to control you in the first place. The ones that don't need guilt, or silence, or flattery, because they were never built on getting something out of you to begin with. If even one of these signs sounded familiar, that's worth sitting with for a moment. Pick one, just one, and notice it the next time it shows up in your life, instead of letting it pass by unremarked. Subscribe if you want your mind working with you, instead of against you. Quietly building this kind of resistance, one reminder at a time. And if someone in your life needs to hear that being hard to manipulate isn't the same as being hard to love, send this to them.